Shalom, shalom, shalom. Welcome everyone once again. Welcome to Shabbat Night Talk. My name is Chief Avdiel Levi. I'm one of the teachers at Congregation D.C.B. CHOKMAH. That's the House of Knowledge, Wisdom, and Understanding. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and hoping and praying that the Most High God of heaven and earth be with each and every one of you who are joining us tonight. Especially tonight, we have a specially invited guest, my brother, Chief Avdiel Ben Levi, also known as Zion Lexx, who will be joining us. He's on, but he'll be joining us to bring forth a lesson for us a little bit later. So, thanking the Creator for all of us, for His life, for our brothers and sisters. Shabbat Shalom, Ima Havred Yisrael, Tamika Yevra, Nia Long, Adon Moshe Yisrael. Shabbat Shalom to you all. And I don't know who else is on, but Shabbat Shalom to all our viewers, everyone that listens to us, everyone that's helping to make this channel grow and that's helping us to achieve the purpose of teaching God's people. Don't forget to always share the link to your various platforms so that everyone will be privy to this information which we bring forth. Giving all glory to the God of heaven and earth, Yehovah, the one who gives us everything. He's the God that gives and take away, and blessed be His name. And unto Him and Him alone do we give praise. We almost say hallelujah. I'm grateful to this great King for my life, the life of all my loved ones. And I pray that the Most High God will continue to be with them and protect them, that the Most High God will continue to be with all those who are in the midst of us, who call upon His name, and that the Most High God will grant us the prayer of returning us to our land, which He promised to our fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So I'm grateful to be here this evening, late afternoon, early evening. I had the unfortunate task of having to go and speak at a young man's wake. My brother, my blood brother Alex, his best friend Renee Melendez passed away in a car accident this past Sunday, as he was driving home from work, going home on the highway to Jersey. He got into a fatal car accident that cost him his life, and he left behind a wife and two beautiful children, and a host of people that love them and care for him, and he's just an amazing young man. 36 years old, just turned 36 on August 23rd. It makes us understand how fragile life is, and that we must not take life for granted, and that we understand that there's a higher power in heaven that in a blink of an eye will take us away from this earth. My brother Alex, he wanted me to speak for him because he couldn't find the words, and says he's not a great public speaker, and he didn't want to go up there and babble. So it was hard for him to get up there, and he stood there with me, but it's difficult because me and the young brother Renee, we had a relationship. He used to call me Big Bro because I was Al's big bro, so I was Big Bro automatically. And going there and you see all the people that really loved and cared for him, it makes you realize that you have to, for the people that you love, you have to let them know that you love them every day, because you don't know if it's the last day that you might see them. When you walk out the house, and I have to learn that because I didn't grow up in a household like that with a mother that told me that she loved me. I understood that my mother loved me, but This guy was you know, exceptional. Worked a regular job, had his own business on the side, um, heating and air conditioning. You know, had 2 houses. Um, I seen this guy grow. You know, from high school to you know, getting into mischievous little things and then becoming real focused, getting married. Um, Beautiful wedding. You know, I remember he kept he kept telling me, "Come on, big bro, you coming to the wedding, right?" But I told him, unfortunately, I wasn't going to be able to make it because it was on a Shabbat. So, but you know, I say all that to say that, you know, we need to consider life. Um, I reiterated this passage, um, Ecclesiastes chapter 7, and it says, "A good name is better than precious oil, and the day of death than the day of one's birth." Because and for sure, this brother had a good name. He gave you the shirt off his back. He would he would just go above and beyond the call of duty. Um, he was one of those type of individuals. He'll be missed, you know. And he left a good name. From the people that came and spoke, you will really see that it was a lot of people that really cared for him, you know. So he did really have a good name. Um, and why the day of death is better than the day of one's birth is because when you're dead, then all your troubles are gone. You know, all your worries are gone. You don't have to deal with the evils of the world. Verse 2, it is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, but for that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. Meaning that when you go to the house of mourning, you will consider, because when you see the person in the casket, you consider the things that you're doing and know and understand that that could be you next. You know, so to go to the house of feasting, you know, sometimes we like partying, we like doing all those things, but we need to consider life and understand how fragile life is, and learn to that the loved ones around us, when we hurt them, or when we hurt the Creator, and when we go against the words of the Creator and the commandments of the Creator, that the Most High could snatch us up out of here that quick. It says, vexation is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance the heart may be gladdened. Meaning that still in the state of mourning, that you will consider more life and will straighten your way out. All right? Rather than if you're always laughing and you're always happy, you will never consider, because you think that everything is always good. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of the fools is in the house of mirth. So it's not telling you that you can never have fun. That's not what it's saying. It's saying that this is what you constantly pursue and what you look for, that that's not where wisdom comes from. So those are the things. So my heartfelt condolences go out to the Melendez family, to to his mother, his wife, his children, all the, you know, he's a spectacular guy. You know, took care of his wife's um, niece, raised her up like his own, and she gave a great testament to how great this guy was. As a young guy, he didn't have to do this, and he raised her up, and she said some great words. You know, she said, "This is the father that I never had. He would give me anything. He was there for me." Just one of those type of magnificent and splendid guys. And to my brother, Alex, just hold up, my brother. Stay strong. The Most High God makes us all strong, and this too will pass. And you just gotta carry the goodness of your friend and of your brother. You know, there's a in the book of in the book of Proverbs, I believe, chapter 18, verse 24, it says, I believe it's 18:24. and read. There's a friend that one has to his own hurt, but there's a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. So you have a friend to your own hurt. You know, there's people that is in your life that you call friends, and all they do is bring you harm. He said, but there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother, and this was who Renee was to my younger brother. You know, certainly they were closer. They had same things in common. You know, they were both air conditioning and heating guys. They went to the same high school together. The best man at his wedding. Um, Godfather to his children. I mean, all of the above, everything you could check off. So when my younger brother was going through a depressive time and I couldn't talk him out of it, Renee was the one that was able to get him out of it and do all that. So he's going to miss a dear friend, a brother, you know, because he was family, you know. So may the Most High God bless his memory. I'm also hurt, but I have a job to do, and I don't want to bring everybody down, but I just felt like I needed to let y'all know what was going on, and you know, it is what it is, you know, with the Most High God, and Most High God would hopefully bless his family and his household. Hallelujah. So I got my brother Chief Avdiel Ben Levi, also known as Zion Lexx, waiting in the wings, and this brother right here is it's a testament to someone who studies and dedicates themselves to the study or studying the word of the Most High God, and not only studying the word of the Most High God, going to other sources in order to strengthen our book and our way of life. And I always tell him that he's a champion for Israel. He's a champion for Israel. And, you know, you got to give brothers their roses while they're here, while they're alive. He's a champion for Israel because he always stands for Israel. And I always appreciate brothers and sisters that are like that. He does the work, he puts in the time, and that can't be denied. So I'm really grateful that he's here with us tonight. Tonight he's going to be talking about the exile of Israel, of the 10 tribes, through the Assyrian exile, right? So he's going to cover that for us tonight. I'm really happy that he's here with us tonight. I'm really grateful that he accepted my invite. And without any further ado, I introduce to you my brother, Chief Avdiel Ben Levi. Shalom, my brother.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom to the family listening online. Thank you all for having me. First and foremost, I want to give all honor and praise to the God of our ancient forefathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Giving due respect to my dear brother and friend, Chief Uzziel of Congregation Beit D.C.B. in Brooklyn, New York, and also extending that shalom to the family online when I say Shabbat Shalom, Shalom Alechem. Hallelujah. Um, we're in a very, very powerful segment of Torah or Tanakh history this particular week in this junction, where we're actually dealing with some of the atrocities that begin to happen to the nation of Israel once the nation of Israel shows severe signs of distancing themselves from the Creator, His will, His Torah, and this way of life. One of the things that begin to happen is that the Creator warns us and tells us that we will be uplifted and uprooted from the land of which we paid no attention to. He also warned us by his servants, the prophets, and told us that a time was coming where he would actually rip and rend tribes from among us. Hence, we had a split at a period in our history where we had the 10 tribes in the north and Judah in the south, and of course, Levi is scattered throughout the land. and belongs to the Creator exclusively, is never numbered. But nonetheless, um, all of this occurred because we failed to keep our end of the bargain. The Creator called and chose us for no light thing. He chose us to raise up humanity through teaching His will, through introducing them to the Torah. And we failed at that because we failed to practice it first among one another. Before I go into my lesson that I have planned in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 17, the first thing I want to just speak briefly on is the idea of us being a chosen people. It occurs to me sometimes, especially when reading and observing things online, that I think that a greater half of our people have no genuine connection to what it means to be chosen, or don't fully apprehend or comprehend what that entails and what that means. We'll brag about being the chosen of God, but then we'll get out in the streets and in the world and we'll say, forget such and such nation, forget such and such nation, and forget such and such nation because it's all about Israel. God only spoke to Israel. We can go to the book of Amos and we can see that God is telling us He only spoke to Israel. We could go throughout the books of the prophets and God is telling us He only spoke to Israel. While that is true, that He only spoke to us as a nation, we forget that we were chosen to raise up the nations. And I think that that's something that needs to be repeated in this day and time because, again, we seem to have forgotten our purpose as a people, why we were created, why we were brought so nigh or so near unto the Creator. We can't brag about being a chosen people if we fail to do that which we are chosen to do, and that is to raise up humanity through knowledge of the supreme being of the universe, the Holy One of Israel. So I'm not going to dwell on that for too long. I just wanted to touch that lightly. To the family online who has a book nearby, I adjure you to open up the book of 2 Kings. And I would like to ask our brother Chief Uzael, if possible, if he can find an online link to the book of 2 Kings, chapter 17. That way we can actually have it streaming online for people to actually see. Some people may not even be home. Some people may be on their way home. Some people may not have access to books, and it might be a nice idea if we could have like an online site that's just going verse for verse as I'm going through it, as people could see it. With that being said, I'm opening up straight to the book of 2 Kings, chapter 17, verse 1. Hallelujah. It reads on this wise: In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, Hoshea, son of Elah, became king over Israel in Samaria, and he reigned for 9 years. He did that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord, albeit not like the kings of Israel who were before him. And I'll stop right there. So we're now being introduced in this book of 2 Kings, chapter 17, verse 1, to a new personality and a new character in the name of Hoshea, who is introduced as the son of Elah. And the text states that he became king over Israel in the capital of the northern kingdom, which is Samaria, and he reigned for 9 years. Verse 2 says, He did that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord, albeit not like the kings of Israel who were before him. Um, One thing I wanted to stop and hone in on is the idea that sometimes we forget, coming out of the Roman Catholic Church or coming out of Christianity on a whole, where in Christianity it is taught that a sin is a sin. It doesn't matter whether it be murder or whether it be stealing. A sin is a sin. There's no sin greater. And I just want to let you know that that is contrary to the teachings within the Torah and the teachings throughout the Old Testament, or i.e., the Word of God. The Creator definitely makes it clear in more than one places that there are levels to sin. In fact, I recall doing a lecture at our congregation D.C.B. where I spoke on different words for sin that the Torah employs, and I broke down how each word for sin basically entailed a different level of sin. So there are definitely levels of sin, of sinning on a whole. And what the text is making clear, that while Hosea definitely was a sinner and did that which was evil, albeit it was not on the level of the kings who preceded him in the northern tribes. I want to make that clear, just as the text made it clear. So again, there are certainly levels to sin. So I'm going to move on. Verse 3 reads, Shalmaneser, king of Ashur or Assyria, went up against him, and Hoshea became his vassal and sent him a tribute. Here is where the story really begins. Contrary to popular opinion, if you have not heard this before, the term Shalmaneser was not the actual name of that king. In fact, there's like a Shalmaneser, the first, the second, and even a third, meaning that most kings who ascended that line took that same name. So this is actually an epithet. The term Shalmaneser is actually an epithet or a title that was given to him as a surname by the people of Assyria. And the term Shalmaneser, the first part, Shalem, means peace, and Neser means beguiling. So his name, Shalmaneser, as an epithet, entails that he was given the surname Shalmaneser because he spoke peace in a very beguiling way. In other words, the Assyrians come after the Akkadians. The Akkadians are the world's first empire builders. And by empire, I'm talking about rulership outside of one's land. That's the idea of empire building. When you're adding to your sway, to your rule, to your jurisdiction, you're adding lands that do not necessarily belong to you ancestrally. And the Akkadians are the world's first empire builders. The Assyrians, who conquer them and come after them, take up the same mantle and begin to move out and acquire other lands and other territories as well. And in particular, this particular king, as did two or three that preceded him, when they would approach a city, they would come with words of peace, albeit harboring in their heart the idea and the desire to take land from these people. But they first approached them in a very peaceful and beguiling way, similar to what we have witnessed, or at least our ancestors have witnessed here in America, uh, via the indigenous population that was here pre-Columbus or pre-colonial America. When they got off them ships, they spoke very peaceably. Not too shortly thereafter, they sent them blankets with smallpox. So we can't forget that. We can't forget in our most recent history, we have a template of Americans, or i.e., early Europeans coming into indigenous America, pre-European, and offering them peace, speaking peaceably. And once the indigenous population puts their guards, or i.e., their swords down, they present them with gifts in the form of blankets. And these blankets had smallpox, which wiped out populations of the indigenous native tribes here before Europeans entered. So, again, I'm showing you a most recent template of the idea of a people coming in peaceably, yet harboring in their heart the desire to do harm. And this is the concept behind the epithet Shalmaneser. It was a title given to him and to his two predecessors, namely his father and grandfather, who acquired those titles because of their tactics. They would approach a city with peace, albeit harboring danger and threat of harm to those people. Now, as I stated earlier, the Assyrians are the world's empire builders, taking up after the Akkadians. So now they're looking to enter the land of Israel, and they are choosing a very opportune time to do so. The Assyrians are not a newly come kingdom once Hoshea comes to throne. The Assyrians been around for some time now, but the climate, politically speaking, is to their liking. Why? In order to understand the stories that take place in the books of Judges, in the books of Joshua, and in the books of Kings, And in the book of Chronicles, you have to study the political background of the neighboring lands so that you can fully take in and understand things that are going on when you see us interact with other nations. If you don't understand the political turmoil or political campaigns that are being waged during that time, or i.e. the political climate of that time, you're going to be lost to some major facts when it comes to trying to analyze what is actually occurring. So Shalmaneser perfectly chose this opportune time to approach the land of Israel and take it by force, but first approaching with words of peace because he wanted to capitalize on the division. He knew that it was already a couple of years, years before that the northern kingdom had split, and you have Judah in the south and the 10 tribes in the north. And as you know, a divided people can't stand. So while we're arguing Judah versus the other 10 tribes, neighboring nations are paying attention. There's an African proverb that says, when two brothers fight, an enemy comes to dispossess their inheritance. That is exactly what is occurring here. As the two same people who have self-divided themselves because they fell short to the will of the Creator, and I hope you're paying attention to the language that I'm using. I said the same two people who self-divided themselves. No, Chief Avdiel, or no, Zion Lexx. What do you mean? The book says that the Creator tore the 10 tribes apart. Well, the Creator only did so because of our actions. So I am correctly telling you that we caused it. Later on, as we approach the 18th chapter, I'm going to revisit that idea so that you can understand what Deuteronomy 28:68 really and genuinely means when it says that we sold ourselves, or you shall sell yourselves as slaves to your enemies. I'm going to visit that briefly once we get into the next chapter, but I wanted to touch on that real quick. So we have to understand that the timing, the political climate, is that the nation of Israel on a whole, both north and south, are divided. And we have to understand that a divided people are self-conquered. I'm going to say that again. A divided people are self-conquered. The only way that any nation can come upon the children of Israel and become victorious is that the children of Israel forsake God through forsaking his Torah, and they also lose their unity. Because even unity in itself is a powerful thing, even when you're doing that which is wrong. Let me, just remind you of that too. And if that doesn't make sense to you, I would ask you to revisit the book of Genesis, chapter 11, where the Creator spoke about the unity of the people being so perfect that each man behaved as one. You had all of these descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, or Shem, Ham, and Japhet, and they are all behaving as one man to construct this huge zigguratу, this huge temple. But the Aboriginal term is zigguratу or ziggurat. And that's what they were constructed, which is known today as the Tower of Babel, which is actually still standing, by the way. You can actually go to southern Iraq, to a place called, ironically, Nimrud, Nimrud, and you can see remnants of the Tower of Babel standing. The dimensions that is described in the Torah is the same dimensions that you can see there. It was made out of mud brick, so that even though it's weather torn, the mud brick still allowed it to survive centuries. So you're able to actually see the remnants. So you're able to actually see that this was a historical event that took place in history regarding our people. Before I drift too far off, I'm going to move on to the fourth verse. But first, let me just finish the third verse. So Shalmaneser, which again is an epithet for one who introduces peace but has the intent to introduce danger. The king of Assyria went up against Hoshea, and Hoshea became, in English, they say his vassal, which I don't think really captures what the text is talking about. The text says Eved, which literally means a slave. A vassal state is a state that is in league with another state, and to the extent that that other state may still have power and control over it, but nonetheless, that state still has some autonomous rights. What the Torah calls eved, and eved has no autonomous right. And eved takes orders or follows orders. So I want to use the term slave here because I see in many of the English translations it'll say that Hoshea became his vassal. I want to use what the Torah says. Eved, he became his slave, and he sent him a tribute. So not only does he come up and besiege the land, but he enforces and imposes upon him a tax. You're going to pay to make sure that we don't come in here and take what we want and do what we want, which during this time period, Hosea felt he had to do it. Why? I have that question to ask. Why would Hosea feel compelled to listen to anyone outside of the God of Israel? Well, it goes back to how he was introduced. The Torah says that he did that which was evil in the eyes of the Creator, which means at the end of the day, he definitely knew the Creator's power. He definitely knew and understood what the history of Israel spoke on concerning the Exodus and the might of the Creator, but he still wanted to do that which was evil, which still doesn't necessitate the idea that he actually put his trust in God. So because he does not put his trust in God, he is subject to fear of man. This is a very, very um, defining point in a man or woman's life. When you fail to subject yourself or submit yourself to the will of God, you become subject to the fear of man. Whenever you strengthen your loins, as it were, or strengthen your spirit and get that steadfast soul towards doing the will of the Creator, you have no fear of man whatsoever. It literally does not exist. It is tantamount to what Adam calls Ari. Remember in the book of Genesis, it says that Adam named all of the animals. So when he sees the monkey, he calls him Kof, because the word Kof in Hebrew means to imitate. And if anyone studies zoology, but in particular the behavior of apes, chimpanzees, and monkeys, you know that they imitate man to a T. And this is by design. They actually try to. With that being said, when Adam gave every animal their name, he named them essentially according to their essential characteristics. So he calls the ape a kof because the ape envices or wishes to emulate man. He comes to the giraffe and he calls him geref, geref, which if you are a Yemenite Yehudi, or Yemenite Jew, or a Yemenite Israelite, you don't say giraffe with a G, you say giraffe, because the Yemenite Yehudim or the Yemenite Israelites, they pronounce the letter Gimel with a J. That's where we get the concept of the people in Arabia calling upon the angel Jibril as opposed to the angel Gabriel. Because just like the Yemenite Yehudim, the Arabic people pronounce the letter Gimel with a J. So giving us a little bit more insight, our English word giraffe comes from the Hebrew word geref, which means a long neck. So when Adam approached this creature, he calls it a geref because of its elongated neck. These are very, very important concepts to hone in on. Um, Moving on. Verse 4 says, Then the king of Assyria discovered that Hoshea had betrayed him, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and he did not send up his tribute to the king of Assyria as he had year by year. Therefore, the king of Assyria arrested him and incarcerated him in prison. I'll stop there. When we come to the fourth verse of 2 Kings chapter 17, this is the verse that scholars are saying is not a historical event. I want to make that clear to you because that's what a teacher should at least do. He should be transparent. I should not be holding on to information because I believe that it weakens our argument. I should be bringing to your attention all parts of the argument so that you can strengthen yourself with enough information to be able to combat it on some level. So I'm telling you correctly that in an academic setting, 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 4 is where the text is no longer historical. But I'm also here to tell you that that is perfectly inaccurate because as we know, our text is perfectly accurate. So we're not talking about an event that is not historical. We're talking about people who are not privy to our text, and where they find absence of evidence, they find the evidence of absence, which, as you know, philosophically, we're talking about a non-factor that makes no sense. I'm pretty sure that by this age and by this time, most of us have heard of the concept that the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Because you have not found something does not mean it does not exist. You know, so sometimes I have the dialogue with people where they want to talk about whether or not we can prove that God exists. And then, you know, they want to put you in the hot seat. I start the argument off real easy. I first say, I will entertain this argument when you first prove that God does not exist. And I can tell you to this date, that argument is never proved. So moving on. What's very important here to hone in on is the idea that the king of Egypt that is mentioned here, he's called So, which, let me switch over to the Hebrew side of my book really quick. Where are we at? We're in verse 4. Wayisa, Melech Ashur, De Hoshea, Kishir Ashir Shilach, Melachim El So. So yes, So. So is spelled Samek Wav Aleph in the Hebrew text. Samek Wav Aleph. And it is thought to be the name of this Egyptian king. But when you go to the various Egyptian king lists, whether it be the king list on the Shabbat stone, whether it be the king list that Manetho presents you with, or whether it be the Turin king list, none of the king lists actually lists a king, or a nisut, which is the Egyptian word for king, a nisut, by the name of So. So this is why academics are stating that this is not an historical account, because there is no such king by the name of So in Egypt. And here is where study, scholarship, and diligence will teach us. The biblical scholars write the term Samek Wav Aleph because that is the name of the capital city of the king of Egypt during this period, which is in the Kemetic tongue called Sao, S-A-O, Sao. That is the capital city of the king of Lower Egypt, which is the western to eastern delta, Nile Delta. What do I mean? What I'm trying to hone in on is I'm trying to give you information that would strengthen you to understand that our book is very factual and very historical. Most scholars who come to this part of the book will say that this king does not exist, which I'm telling you, the name So is not a name of an Egyptian king, so they are right. So the problem is in the translators of the Bible who are translating the term So as if it is the name of a person as opposed to the name of a city. Now, if you don't know, Egypt or ancient Kemet is in their third intermediate period. Who knows what an intermediate period means as far as Egyptian kingship is concerned? Anyone can type in your comment in the comment section. In the interim, I'll begin to tell you what it is. Egypt has its first intermediate period about dynasties 7, 8, 9, and 10 down into the 11th. starting with the end of the reign of Pepi II, who reigned for 90 years on the throne in Egypt. Historically, kings who reign extremely long, the following kings, the kings who are going to come after them, usually get on a throne that is weakened. What do I mean? If I'm reigning for 90 years, don't you think there's 3 or 4 people that was next in line that's pretty much pissed off about that, angry and or upset? So what does that cause? It causes political friction and political turmoil. It causes sex. It causes people forming little packs and little underground meetings. So what is occurring during this time is while King Pepi II is ruling extremely long in ancient Egypt, you have forces in between that are actually raising up. And that raising up of different factions is going to cause what is called the first intermediate period of ancient Egypt, which means this is a period where no one had respect for the pharaoh. So the seventh dynasty, let's say that would be the seventh pharaoh, which it's not. But let's say it would be the seventh pharaoh. Nobody called him by his name. We just called him seven. Similar to how people treat Donald Trump today. Most people who have no respect for him, including myself, we can't even fix our face to say Donald Trump. We be like 45 or your president. So this is an era in Egyptian kingship where people lack so much respect for the Egyptian king, it's as if he doesn't exist. But they take it even further because they say that, listen up, I'm the governor of this particular nome or city in Egypt, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm the king. So during the first intermediate period of ancient Egypt, which is dynasties 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, you have normal governors in the land of Egypt who are rising up and saying, I'm the pharaoh. And you have about 13 of them. In fact, Manetho, who's an Egyptian priest, records in the 3rd century BCE that there were 70 kings in Egypt's first intermediate period that reigned for 70 days. And he's basically saying that each king reigned for a day. Now, an exaggeration, it exactly is, but that exaggeration is still honing in on a point or a concept. There were so many governors claiming to be the pharaoh at that period that it weakened the kingdom of Egypt to where foreign rulers could come in, and that's exactly what was beginning to occur. Foreigners were beginning to come in because of its weakened state, and the governors were becoming more powerful than the pharaoh on the throne. Saying all that to say, the period of Hoshea, the son of Eli, and Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, is during Egypt's third intermediate period. The second intermediate period of Egypt is when the Hyksos rulers come in. These are Asiatics or Semites, descendants of Shem, coming into the land of Israel and actually sit on the throne. The third intermediate period, which is the period of Hoshea and Shalmaneser, this period you find Libyans in the northwest or directly to the west of Egypt on the throne, and you have Cushites or Ethiopians coming up for the south, vying for the throne as well, because you're going to hear about a name, a king in Ethiopia known as Taharka, who was a no-joke king and a no-joke warrior and a no-joke general. And it was during this period that you begin to see Taharka, king of Ethiopia, begin to rise up. And you also see that the kings who sit on the throne of Egypt were not native Egyptians. This is a very important point to hone in on, something that you would not know if you are just reading the Tanakh. Because the Tanakh tells you that, and I'm going to read verse 4 again. It says, then the king of Assyria discovered that Hoshea had betrayed him, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt. So now, being that you just read that Hoshea sent letters or letters of allegiance to a king in Egypt by the name of So, which, by the way, no king exists. It's actually the name of a city. And it calls him the king of Egypt. So you must assume he's Egyptian, right? No, because if you don't know the political climate, you would not have known that Egypt is in its third intermediate period, meaning they are in dynasties 21 22, 23, and 24. But right now we're in Dynasty 21. Very important information because dynasties 21 through 24 are Libyans, or who the Egyptians themselves call the Tamhu. This is Europeans. So, contrary to popular opinion, let me make this straight right now, real quick. We're taught in most Israelite settings that the first time that white people come into Egypt is Alexander the Great. This is not true. The third intermediate period of Egypt brings in the Tamhu, or the Libyans, but the Egyptians refer to them not as Libyans. Libyan is a very, very modern name. The most ancient name of that region is Afri, which everybody pretty much North Africa was called the people of Afri. And then in that particular region, west of Kemet or west of Egypt, the Egyptians called them the Tamhu, which is how you say European or Caucasian in the Egyptian language. And when they went to draw them on the walls, they drew them as white people with tattoos, with long braided hair, but their hands, their chests, and their feet were full of tattoos. I wish that I would have actually presented this tonight in a PowerPoint form so that you can actually see what they look like, so you can understand that the ruling pharaoh at this time was actually a European, and his name is not so. We don't know his name because the Torah does not name him. In fact, a lot of the kings of Egypt, especially native Egyptian kings, are not named in the Torah, and there's a reason behind this. But before I give you the reason, I'm going to give you a little bit of background information. You have Afrocentric teachers in the community that teach that the Bible is inaccurate because it'll mention Egypt and it'll mention its pharaohs, but it will never mention a single name of a pharaoh. So in the story of Joseph, it'll speak about Pharaoh, but it won't name him. In the story of Abraham, it'll speak of a Pharaoh, but it won't name him. And in the story of Moses, it'll speak of a Pharaoh, but it won't name him. So you have Afrocentrists in the community who say that this proves that our book is fictitious because every Egyptian king had at least 5 royal names, which is true, but the Torah doesn't name one. But what they forget is that the Torah is very clear on the notion that Moses wrote the Torah. To all my Israelites who are very clear on that, let me get a thumb up in the room real quick. And if you are unclear on that, I guess put a thumb down. But as far as I was taught, and as far as I can see, and as far as I read, Moses is the author of Torah. And through dictation, the Creator speaking to him on Mount Sinai, he was able to put together this text that we are reading today called the Torah. So if Moses is the author of the Torah and he is raised in Egypt, he knows something about Egyptian policy. It is Egyptian policy that the kings of other nations are never mentioned on the walls of Egypt, especially defeated kings, because it is Egyptian culture, heritage, and pride that when you speak the name of an ancestor, you give it life. To speak the name of your ancestor in Egyptian culture means to give that ancestor life. So the Egyptians never recorded the names of defeated kings. You will find instances of it in Kemet, but it was not the norm. For the most part, they erased the name because in erasing the name, they're also erasing the memory. They're not speaking them. So Moses, who our Torah clearly tells us was raised in ancient Kemet, was raised in ancient Egypt, he followed suit with the same practice. The God of Israel humbled Egypt or ancient Kemet to the point of utter shame. And to add fuel to that fire, Moses, being trained up in Egypt and their culture, says, and guess what? Just like you refuse to give respect by not naming respected kings, so are we not going to give you that respect. So that is why you don't find the names of kings mentioned in the Torah, because it is Egyptian culture not to mention those names, not to give them life, and as a sign of disrespect we are not even going to mention you. We're going to literally act as if you don't even exist. So as big and bad as the Pharaoh of the Exodus is, he's not even named in our book. And that speaks volumes. Let me move on. Hallelujah. And so it was. Okay, verse 5. Now we have Hoshea refusing to pay tribute to Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria. And it says the king of Assyria then invaded the entire country, and he went up to Samaria, and he besieged it for 3 years. Let me just, kind of break that down, because a lot of this is so far removed from our era that we just truly have no concept of what this must have felt like. Most of us who are 30 plus, 40 plus, 50 plus, and on remember the Iraq War, uh, you know, and I guess some of the teeny boppers and definitely some of the 20-year-olds remember the Afghan War, that war in Afghanistan. Name a time in our history that you can remember where the nation of America or the American people is besieged by another nation for 3 years. No, for 2 years. Matter of fact, give me a year. We can't even relate to that. So I had to stop on this point just to kind of cause you to understand what we are dealing with. When the king of Assyria came up against Samaria, in order for the text to state that he besieged it for 3 years, that means those people were fighting their butts off not to give up that land. So I want to make that clear too. Although he besieged it for 3 years, some credit is actually given to Hoshea and the people, because it did not occur immediately. He had to actually besiege it for 3 years. But in doing so, let's move on and find out what happens. In the 9th year of the reign of Hoshea, verse 6, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and exiled Israel to Assyria. He settled them in Halah, in Habor, by the Gozan River, and in the cities of the Medes, the Medias. Now, let me just stop right there for a second. This is after the Egyptian captivity, the very first captivity that Israel experiences. This is even pre-Babylonian. Sometimes we forget that. I've heard teachers get up on the Mizbeach, the bema, the altar, whatever we want to call it, and they would say that, Israel was in captivity to the Egyptians, to the Babylonians, to the Medes and the Persians, to the Greeks and the Romans, and they stopped there. So many of us forget the Assyrian captivity, which truly sparked it all, because none of those other successive kings would have or could have been successful had not this particular king of Assyria weakened the Israelite empire or the Israelite nation by exiling a great majority of the 10 northern tribes. You have to understand that once that occurred, the land of Israel became a vacuum for outside rulership coming into the land. Everybody wanted to put their foot in that land once again. If you didn't already know this, Israel, strategically speaking, from a political perspective, is the most strategic point in this world to actually live in as a nation. This is before there were airplanes and cars and trains. You have to realize that if you lived in, let's say, Sumer or ancient Babylon, the only way that you're coming to Egypt or the interior of Africa, you're coming through Israel. Israel was the major trade route. You had to actually come through Israel to get into the interior and posterior of the land of Africa. And the same thing with Europe and Asia. Israel literally sat in the midst of the nations. And this was all strategic. And this is one of the things that made Israel such a powerful people as well. Because the people that sit in the crossroad is a people that interacts with everyone. And a people that interacts with everyone is a wise people. So the king of Assyria now comes in, and he not only besieges the city for 3 years, but he finally gains control and exiles the northern 10 tribes from Israel into Assyria, but in particular, it states in Halah, Habor, and the Gozan River, and in the cities of the Medes. Now, if you didn't know this already, the city of the Medes is basically your Indo-Aryan tribes, which are your earliest European tribes. The earliest European tribes that begin to advance on the world scene is the Indo-European in the form of the Medes, who then begin to mix with the Persians to become the mighty Persian Empire, which was an admixture of the Medes and the Persians. But the Medes represented the Indo-European half of that empire. So when you look at a Persian army, this was quite an army to witness in the ancient world. In today's world, not so phenomenal. But in the ancient world, this is quite an army to witness, because you're literally looking at damn near the United Nations. Because African people or black people come in many shades. And then you have Indo-Europeans under the people of Media, the Indo-Aryans, who are Caucasian, or your earliest Caucasians. So when you're looking at absolutely, I see a sister wrote India. Exactly. In fact, a lot of people may be unaware of the idea that the term Aryan actually originates Indian, in the Indian lexicon. The word Aryan is actually an Indian word to describe the caste system in India. The people who are on the top of the totem pole in India's caste system, they are called Aryans, or the pure race, and they're also the lighter ones. So yes, the sister is right when she says, I believe India today. Yes, there were parts of India at this time in the Persian and Media Empire. Part of the Media, or the part of the Median or the Medes Empire, definitely included parts of India. Hence the term Indo-Aryan. Indo-Aryan. Not to be confused with the later derivation used by the KKK and neo-Nazis for the pure white people. This is the earliest form of the term Aryan, where it's used to describe the earliest Europeans who actually stemming from black people. Very important point to hone in on. Verse 7 reads, And so it was that the children of Israel sinned to Jehovah their God, who had taken them up out of the land of Egypt from under the oppression of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Again, this king is not named. The Torah and Moses is very clear on who this king is, but never reveals it to us today, because the idea that is pushed in holding on to that name is adding disrespect to disrespect in the same fashion that the Egyptians would do to other people. We're not even going to name you in history. We're going to act as if you literally did not exist. So it says in verse 7, And the children of Israel sinned to the Lord their God, who had taken them up from the land of Egypt, from under the oppression before the children of Israel. Let me just give you a little background again. So it says that the 10 tribes of the Israelites were removed out of Judah 947 years after their forefathers came out of the land of Egypt. So I'm giving you chronology and a timeline so that you can actually equate this historically. Because at the end of the day, even though the intent of the Tanakh is not that it's a historical book, it still contains a great deal of history. So 947 years after the Exodus from Egypt, the children of Israel are now being exiled right back again into enemy territory, this time in the form of the Assyrians. And I'll move on to verse 8. They walked in the decrees of the nations whom the Lord their God, driven out before the children of Israel, and in the decrees that the kings of Israel had enacted. The children of Israel imputed things that were not so to the Lord their God, and built for themselves high places in all their cities, from the solitary watchtower to the fortified city. They erected for themselves pillars and Asherah trees upon every tall hill and under every leafy tree. They burned incense there at all their high places, like the nations whom the Lord had exiled before them, and they did wickedly to anger the Lord. They worshiped idols, concerning which the Lord had told them, "You shall not do this thing." So, what is the Torah or the text of the Tanakh giving us at this time? Oh, it's stating our crime. Because if we're reading now that we're being exiled, a greater half of the nation is being exiled to Assyria and neighboring lands, the first thing that you want to check is why. So the Torah is laying out our crime before us, is speaking to us in the here and now. This was the crime of our forefathers, our ancestors, and this is what caused our second exile. So the Lord had issued warning in Israel and in Judah throughout all the hand of the prophets of any vision, saying, "Repent from your evil ways and observe my commandments and my decrees in accordance with the entire Torah that I commanded your forefathers and that I have sent you through my servants the prophets." But they did not listen, and they acted stiff-necked, and they stiffed their neck like the neck of their fathers. Let me stop right here. Usually, well, let me say this before I say that. Sometimes when we read in the Tanakh, and it happens to me a lot, we miss some very, very important things. And then we go back and read it and we see something and we think it's new, but it's been there the whole time. We usually read in the Torah of God hardening a man's heart to fulfill the desire of that man's heart. So in the case of the Pharaoh, let's say, God hardened his heart because Pharaoh wanted to do evil to us, but he realized he didn't have the power. So God said, "Okay, you this bent on being evil? Well, guess what? I'm going to give you some strength of heart. I'm going to harden your heart. I'm going to make you think you're actually capable of this so that you could get ahead and jump." And once he was ready to jump, we saw what happened. But the Torah always speaks of hardening of the heart, either the Creator doing it or man doing it himself. I'm not sure if everybody caught it, but did you just read just now that the children of Israel hardened their necks? What's that all about? Let me read that again in case anybody missed it. Verse 14. But they did not listen, and they hardened their necks like the necks of their forefathers. Did anybody catch that? Put a thumb up in the room if you caught that. This is very, very important to hone in on because, again, a lot of times when we're reading fast and we're honing in on things that mean something to us and skipping things that seem insignificant. And I'm here to tell you that what is in here right now is extremely significant because this is one of the very first times in all of Scripture that the Scripture actually speaks of hardening the neck or stiffening one's neck, making one's neck stiff. Very, very important. We usually, again, encounter a person hardening their heart or God hardening their heart. Now it talks about a stiff neck. So let me give you the reason. Anybody ever had a stiff neck? Obviously, I want to say there's probably going to be everybody in this room could say they've had it. Now, if your neck is stiff, how hard is it for your neck to turn? Extremely hard, right? Because that's happened to me several times. When you have a stiff neck or when you have any kind of a neck pain, it's almost impossible for you to turn your neck on its own. You damn near got to turn your whole body, correct? All right. So when the text says that they stiffened their neck, the text is damn near telling you that in order to follow God, they had to literally force themselves to do so, which they didn't want to do because they were hardening their necks. In other words, to actually serve God would have been painful to them. That's deep. And it's in the language. And we didn't have to go crazy into Hebrew to get that either. But it's all in the language. They were so bent on doing that which was opposite and contrary to God's will that it actually became painful for them to turn in the direction of God. That is deep. How does one get so far removed from wanting and desiring to please and do God's will that it actually becomes painful to pay attention to your God? That is deep. Let's move on. Verse 15. They rejected his decrees and his covenant that he had sealed with their forefathers, and his warnings that he had warned them about. And they went after worthless and vain things, and they became worthless and vain. The Torah just drew a question and an answer right there. And I want to hone in on that too. It says, and I'll repeat in verse 15, they went after worthless and vain things. And this is the part I like. The text says, and they became worthless and vain. That's a teaching moment for all of us. Don't your mama, and I want to use the word the way I'm saying it, don't you remember when your mama would tell you you hang around with dogs, you're going to catch fleas? This is exactly what is occurring here. When you chase that which is vain, when you chase that which is worthless, you become vain and worthless yourself. In the world of a vegan thought, a vegan would say you are what you eat. And in the world of morality or amorality, being without morals, you are what you embrace. You better believe that. Everything that makes you you is your soul, which is essentially your thoughts or essentially your will, your convictions. That which you chase, you become. Therefore, beware of what you chase because you are going to become what you're chasing. Some of us online are parents, and this is why many of us stress to our children, don't follow so and so, don't follow so and so, because we realize that as innocent as our children are, and as perfect as we see them, if they follow that no good so and so that we know they're hanging out with, they're going to become just like them. As the Torah says in this instance in verse 15, they went after that which was worthless and vain, and they became worthless and vain. That's a teaching moment speaking to us right here and now in real time. If you chase vanity, you become that. And after the ways of the nations that surrounded them, concerning whom the Lord had commanded them not to do like them, they forsook all the commandments of the God. Oh my God, this is deep right here. Because even a wicked man got some kind of morals, right? Don't we read about the guy who the drug dealer, let's say on the block, who he deals death to drug addicts. But then, people that know him closely, they be like, nah, I know he sold drugs, or I know she was involved in drugs, but, they paid for my mother's grocery and he paid for my brother to go to college. We could still cite some things of high morale that even a wicked person can do, right? Even a wicked person can still have areas of morale that they are perfectly in sync with, right? Not this generation of Israel, because I'm reading exactly what the Torah says word for word. And it didn't say they forsook most of the commandments. It didn't say they forsook some of the commandments. It says they forsook all of the commandments. You know what you become at that point? You become an animal. Because the only difference between an animal and a man is that an animal freely gives himself what his eye sees. But a man who was supposed to govern his actions with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge is supposed to censor some of those ideas and visions and temper it with his knowledge of God. Or else you become an animal who freely gives of himself what his eyes see. Hence, let's look at the word for wicked in Hebrew, Rasha. You ever notice that the word for Hebrew, Rasha, is literally the same word for head? plus the letter ayin. If you didn't know already, if you take an ayin and you add it as a suffix to an adjective in Hebrew vernacular, that is usually how the names of animals are formed, or as a prefix. For instance, the scorpion is called an akrav in Hebrew, and the root is korev, which means to draw near. But draw near in the sense of how the Torah says that Judah in Genesis chapter 37 drew near for battle. The term karav literally means to draw near, but it has a connotation which means to draw near in battle. So when Adam approached the scorpion, he called it akrav. He gave it an ayin as a prefix, which automatically let us know that we're talking about a coarse being. We're talking about an animal. But then he gives it the term karev to describe its warlike behavior. Because if anyone studies zoology again, and you look at in particular scorpions, you know that they actually enjoy battle. They love waging war. In fact, one of the ways that scorpions mate is through battle. So when Adam comes to name them, he calls them akrav. Now, again, what is very, very significant about this is that we see this term being used throughout the text, but I don't want to get you lost, so I'm gonna come out of there real quick because I could definitely dwindle, and I don't want to do too much of that because there is a lot of reading material here. So I'm going to try to stick to the script and not venture off too much. So I'm going to go back to, they forsook all of the commandments, and they made a molten image for themselves, 2 calves. That's deep. Remember, I just said that the exile of the children of Israel into Assyrian lands was 947 years after the Exodus. And remember, right after the Exodus, remember Aaron stripped us of all our gold? And then there were 2 golden calves fashioned and made. 947 years later, the nation is doing the same thing. 2 molten images of calves are being made. Then there's an Asherah tree. And then it says that they prostrated themselves to all the hosts of the heavens and worship Baal. Verse 17. They passed their sons and their daughters through the fire and practiced divination and sorcery. And they dedicated themselves to do that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord, to anger him. Then the Lord became very angry with Israel, and he removed them from his sight. I want to stop right there. What does that even mean? Talk to me. What does that even mean? I've read this, hundreds of times. And each time I read it, it bothers me deeply. How does God remove us from his sight? I just want to think about that for a second. I'm going to use some Greek terms. We speak of God being the omnipotent one, omnipotent, the all-powerful, the almighty. We speak of him being the omnipresent. He's everywhere at all times. We speak of him as being omniscient. He sees and knows all things. So when I encounter this verse, knowing that our God is an omniscient being, he is both seeing and knowing all things. So how does the text state in verse 18 of 2 Kings 17 that our God became so angry with us that he removed us from his sight? Can God put you somewhere where he can't see? That didn't make sense to me. But then I remembered that one of my teachers years ago said to me, in order to get the best of scripture, you have to open it up and stretch it out like a panoramic text. He said, you know the difference between your linear lens and your panoramic lens? I said, yeah, the panoramic lens allows for more vision. The panoramic lens allows for more peripheral view. You can take in a whole landscape with the panoramic lens, something that's very hard to do with a linear lens. He says, yes. So when you're reading a particular passage in Torah, and you're formulating your opinion on it based solely on that passage, you have a linear understanding of it, or i.e., a limited understanding of it. But when you read every passage and you open up in your mind all of the other adjacent passages, so that you look at it as a panoramic text, you have a greater capacity to take in what is being said. So, in applying that, here we go. How does the text say that God removed us from his sight when that's almost impossible? How can God remove us from his sight when he sees all things? Well, remember that the Creator is on record in the Torah saying that the land of Israel and Jerusalem in particular is the land that the Lord watches. And it says that the eyes of the Lord are on it 24/7, year round. Anybody recall that? Put a thumb up in the room. Recall any time you've read in the Tanakh where it literally says that the eyes of God are always upon the land of Israel. Put some thumbs up. So, in understanding that the eyes of the Lord are continually upon the land of Israel, it is as if God has his eyes closed to the world. That's deep. Because that goes back to what we talked about earlier, the idea of us being chosen. God is only working with man through the nation of Israel. But if Israel is not keeping the law themselves, i.e., not raising up man, then God damn near got his eyes closed to the whole world. And that's why the world is spinning off course today as if no God exists. The people that I raised up to teach the world of God choose not to follow me. My eyes are upon these people, but in particular upon this land, and damn near close to the rest of the world. That's deep. So when the text says that God removed them from his sight, it's literally speaking about the land of Israel, the land that is stated in the text that God has his eyes on from year to year, year round, as if God's eyes are closed to the rest of the world. Now, if you doubt the truth of that, I want to remind you something else in scripture. Do you remember when Father Abraham was told by God, take thy son, even thine only son, and bring him up on the mount, and you shall offer him up as a burnt offering? God called Isaac, the second born son of Abraham, his only son. Ishmael was still alive, people. In fact, Ishmael is the firstborn. But God called Isaac in that particular verse in Genesis 22. He said, take thy son, thine only son. That's literally God telling Abraham, yeah, I know Ishmael is cool to you, but in my eyes, he damn near don't even exist. Therefore, take your only son and bring him up to the mount that I will show you. People, this is not a game here. When God say that the land of Israel is a land that his eyes are upon, he's also saying, or the underlying statement is, his eyes is damn near close to the rest of the world. And that's deep because, again, it points to how severe your job is and why we are punished so much as a people. We cause the entire world to be off course because we fail to keep God's law. God is only dealing with man vis-a us. And when he ain't dealing with us, he ain't dealing with nobody, period. This thing don't come together without us. That's why these great things occur to us. But let's read on. Verse 18. So he removed us from his presence, which means the land of Israel, and none remained except the tribe of Judah alone. And even Judah did not observe the commandments of the Lord their God. But if you notice, it didn't say Judah didn't observe all. So again, there's levels to sin. Judah wasn't as wicked as the northern tribes, but he was still wicked nonetheless. And it says in regard to Judah, and they walked in the decrees of Israel, which they had enacted. So the Lord rejected the entire offspring of Israel and oppressed them. Time out. Because when we speak of the oppressor, we usually speak about the nations that God is using to chastise us. But I just read in the text just now that God says that he oppressed them. But if you notice, the oppression is coming from other nations. But the text is telling us that God is oppressing us. That's something to consider when you go outside and you be mad at the white man. That's something to consider when you go outside and you be mad at various African nations that had a hand in the transatlantic slave trade. That's something to consider when you have every excuse except to own up to that which you caused yourself. When your mom or your father beat you with the belt, you get mad at the belt? No, you don't, because that would be foolish, right? A lot of us got mad at our parents, which was a natural effect. So I have a question. Your real anger is misplaced because the cause of our trouble is not being in league to God's law, not being in alliance to God's law, not doing God's law. That is the cause of our woes. That is the cause of our problem. That is the epidemic in the black community, in the diaspora, in America, in the Caribbean, and throughout the world where you find Israel scattered. That is our issue. We consciously choose to reject God, so he consciously chose to turn his eyes away from us. And that is the issue here. Because I know I just read with very clear eyes, verse 20 saying, the Lord rejected the entire offspring and he oppressed them. But when you go into the historical period of that time, it is other neighboring nations that is oppressing us. But the text is saying God is our oppressor, which means God is using them just as he told us to chastise us. So again, your hate is misplaced. Let me move on. So the Lord rejected and oppressed them. He delivered them into the hands of the plunderers until he had cast them away from his presence. That's deep because we just read he cast us away from our sight. Then it says he cast us away from his presence. So we already know that the presence of God has a special affinity to that land of Israel. Because as soon as the northern tribes were exiled, it says that they were removed from God's presence. But all they did was leave the land of Israel. So the text is telling us that there's a stronger presence of God in the land of Israel than in any other part of the world. And anybody who visited the land of Israel, that's the first thing they say. They literally feel that something is different about this land. And that is the reason why Europeans are coming in the hundreds and thousands, burning themselves in the heat of the sun, catching cancer by the hundreds of thousands, because there was something spiritually taking place different about living in that land, that they're willing to take on skin cancer to be there. That's deep. Let me move on. Verse 21. For Israel had torn itself away from the house of David, crowned Jeroboam the son of Nebat over themselves, and Jeroboam pushed away Israel from following the Lord and caused them to commit a grave sin. The children of Israel went in the way of all the sins of Jeroboam which he committed. They did not turn away from them until the Lord removed Israel from his presence, as he has spoken through all the servants, the prophets. So Israel went into exile from their land to Assyria to this day. Verse 24. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Kutha, and Avava, and Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the cities of Samaria in place of the children of Israel. This is very important because now you have Israelites in the community who don't have teachers, are learning. Their chief center of learning is YouTube, Wikipedia, and Google. They don't belong to congregations. They've never been a part of Israelite organizations. So they're left to be subject to teachings on Facebook, on YouTube, which, albeit great, also comes with its shortcomings and disasters as well. And what do I mean by that? If your chief source of teaching is YouTube, and Facebook, there's a problem unless you live in a city where there is no congregation whatsoever to go to. Even if you can follow a congregation weekly online, that's better than just simply being what people call today a Facebook Israelite. You don't want to be one of those. You want to belong to an organization, because with that comes checks and balances. When you belong to an organization, you know every time you lift your mouth, you have to watch what comes out of it, because you represent that entire organization. So there's a certain discipline that comes with that as well. See, a person that is just a so-called Facebook Israelite, they can curse people out. They can go in people's inbox and talk to people's wives and people's husbands. They could get utterly ridiculous because there's no check and balance. They belong to no organization. They can simply unfollow, unfriend, or block, and then move on to the next person and continue in the same sin. That's deep. Saying that to say, Israelites who specialize in not having a teacher because they just subject themselves to Facebook and YouTube and Wikipedia have come to challenge the veracity of the text that we use, called the Masoretic text, the text that we're using in our Hebrew Tanakhs. Hebrew Tanakhs. And they say, why are we placing so much emphasis on the Masoretic text? Uh, what about the Samaritan text? That's an even older text. Why are we going by the Masoretic text? Well, let's read on the next couple of verses, and we're gonna find out why studious Israelites don't put respect on the Samaritan text. Let's read it a little bit. First, I'm gonna read over 24. The king of Assyria brought people from Babylon, Cutha, and Aviva, and Hamath, and Sepharvaim, and settled them in the cities of Samaria in place of the children of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and dwelt in its cities. It happened that at the beginning of the period of their dwelling there, they did not fear the Lord. And the Lord incited lions against them, and they were killing among them. They spoke to the king of Assyria, saying, the nations that you have exiled and settled in the cities of Samaria do not know the law of the God of the land, i.e., Torah. He has incited lions against them, and they are now killing them because they do not know the law of the God of the land. So the king of Assyria issued a command saying, bring to there one of the Kohanim, one of the priests whom you exiled from there, and let them go and settle there and teach them the law of the God of that land. One of the Kohanim whom they had exiled from Samaria came and settled in Bethel, and he would teach them how to fear the Lord. They would make each nation its own God. They would set up their own high places, temples that they built, each man in their cities. The people of Babylon made Sukkot Benot. The people of Cutha made Nergal. The people of Hamath made Ashima, and the Avivites made Nivhaz and Tartak, and the Sepharvites burned their children in the fire to Adremelech and Anamelech, the gods of the Sepharvaim. They feared the Lord, and they appointed some from among themselves as priests for the high places, and they would perform rituals for them in the high places. They feared the Lord, but they still worship their gods. Verse 33. There's a long history of the Samaritans, who are the people who were placed in Samaria in those neighboring regions of northern Israel by the king of Assyria. The people that were placed there, yes, they follow Torah. Yes, they have one of the oldest copies of Torah. But because they do not represent the true house of Israel, and because from the outset, from the beginning, they were never 100 about keeping Torah, because they only kept Torah because they realized that this is a land where if you don't follow what God say, you dead. God is not playing about the land of Israel. Here's something to even to consider. As much as we talk about the European Jew not belonging there, you know that there is no way in hell he could have a 3-minute stay in the land of Israel if somebody from among them ain't keeping Torah on some level. That's no joke. In order to be in that land, Torah must be observed. Do you know that parts of our law made its way even to the Quran? So even the Ishmaelites, the Arab tribes that are living in the land of Israel, there are parts of the Quran that actually agree with Torah, And then there are parts of the Quran where I will tell you unequivocally disagree with the Torah, beyond a shadow of a doubt. But yet those parts that agree, allow them to have stay there. Because again, as the scripture is showing us, you live here, you doing what God say. This ain't no joke. This ain't a land of choices. If you live in the land of Israel, or you keeping Torah on some level, you better believe that. Let's move on. Verse 34. Until this day, they act according to the original practice and according to their customs and according to the Torah and the commandments that the Lord had given to the children of Jacob, whose name he changed to Israel. For the Lord made a covenant with Israel and commanded them, saying, you shall not fear the gods of others, you shall not bow down to them, and you shall not worship them. You shall not slaughter to them. Rather, only the Lord your God, who brought you up from the land of Egypt with great force and with an outstretched arm, him shall you fear, and to him shall you bow down, and to him shall you slaughter. And the decrees and the laws and the Torah and the commandment that he wrote for you, you shall observe to do all the days. So let me just make something clear, because we do talk about Moses writing the Torah through dictation, God speaking and him writing. But many of us are falsely under the notion that the Torah is the ideas of Moses. So in 2 Kings, verse 37, it reminds us who the author of Torah is. And the decrees and the laws and the Torah and the commandments that he wrote for you, meaning God wrote the Torah, you shall observe to do all the days, and you shall not fear the gods of others, and the covenant that I seal with you shall not forget. You shall not fear the gods of others. Rather, you shall fear the Lord your God. He will save you from the hand of your enemies. But they did not obey. Rather, they act according to the original practice. They act according to their original practice. So these nations feared God, yet worshiped their graven images, and also their children's children, as their forefathers have done to this day. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to end my lesson there. And I want to say to the family online, for those who may not be clear on the authenticity of the text that we are reading versus any other ancient text of Torah, you must understand that the text that we are using is supreme, in that the text that we are using is coming from our ancestors. When we start going into some of the more ancient texts, and when I say more ancient, I'm talking about in terms of preservation and what we actually have in our land. Not to say that we don't have older scrolls, older than the Samaritan Torah, because we do, but we must remember that when the Greeks and the Romans came in, they actually took several items from us, including our Torah scrolls. We know that the Vatican has literally miles and miles of literature, and many of those miles contain Judaic or Hebraic or Israelite literature, of which I'm sure we can find Torahs that are much older than the Samaritan text. But let me take it a step further, because I'll give you some insight on what's going on here in Brooklyn, New York. The Jewish man has his hand on a very old text that many European rabbis have saw. And it's the reason to this day that throughout world Jewry, Eastern Parkway, Brooklyn, New York, but namely a place called Kingston, Chief Uzael knows what I'm talking about, and those who live in Brooklyn, New York know what I'm talking about. On Kingston Avenue is the main synagogue of Ashkenazic Jews throughout the globe. Not America, the globe. Reason being, they have a man who recently died that they call the Messiah, the Mashiach, and his name was Yitzchak Schneerson. They believed he was the Messiah, and they began to actually make obeisance to him. They damn near worshiped him, by the way. Anyone that has been to Brooklyn, New York, you'll see his picture on a yellow flag, and you'll see him waving, Yitzchak Schneerson. They called him the Mashiach. Now, aside from their synagogue being extremely famous because they believed that he was the Messiah and he was there, even before they believed that he was a Messiah, they contain and they have and still have in their possession something that made this vicinity so important and so vital. Many of us who read the text of the Torah remember that the Torah talks about in the days of Ezra, them finding scrolls of the law, and the children of Israel realizing that they haven't been keeping the Passover and various other holy days. Well, that scroll was taken to Babylon, and it was held in possession of the children of Israel. You want to know where that scroll is today? That scroll is today on Kingston Avenue in Brooklyn, New York, and Eastern Parkway, in an Ashkenazic museum. And that's the oldest Torah scroll outside of the Samaritan. The oldest, because this is a Torah scroll that Ezra had in his hands. And I'll close it with that. Hallelujah. I'm not sure.
Hallelujah.
Okay.
Torah, my brother. Really appreciate you coming on with us tonight. It was a wealth of knowledge and history. It definitely was something that we needed to hear and really and give me 1 second here because I'm hearing myself in double. Hold on. It definitely was something that we needed to hear and really and give me 1 second here because I'm hearing myself in double. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. I was actually enjoying your lesson on the big screen with everyone else. So thank you, my brother, Chief Avdiel. I know it's getting late. Somebody asked about questions, but I guess if you have questions, you could have written them in the chat if you had a question. Let me see here. I don't know what. Somebody wrote something about a Q&A, but I guess that'll be for another day. This was wonderful, and we appreciate it. I just wanted everyone to get the history of our exile into the Assyrian exile, and how the 10 northern tribes were taken into captivity, and how that transpired and how it came about. Our brother Chief Avdiel is very the word that he likes to use, meticulous, and his breakdowns and bringing forth knowledge and understanding of what's happening in history and connecting it with outside sources. So that's why I felt like it was necessary for someone like him to come and give us that history so that we could see a clear picture of what was going on during that time. And is definitely something that we need to know. As he said, we often forget about the Assyrian captivity, but the Assyrian captivity took away more Israelites from the land than any other captivity at one time. Because they came in there and they swooped and they took the northern kingdom and spread them. So we sometimes downplay that captivity or don't remember it, but that was one of the most damaging captivities that we ever had. The Assyrians were ruthless, and they were swift in the way that they advanced against us. So thanking the Most High God once again for the life of my brother Chief Avdiel, and thank you all for joining us tonight. And as you can see, Chief Avdiel, everyone in the room is thanking you for the lesson that you gave tonight and for bringing forth that knowledge. So, not thank you also. Maybe I could get you back here to maybe we could do something on the regular. get you here maybe once a month, twice a month, and we could discuss other topics that might be relevant to our community. I'm not sure, but that's up to you. So I don't know if you want to give some last words, my brother. At this time, I'll give you the opportunity to say some last words, some departing words, and then that way we could close out the stream.
All right, all right. Thank you very much, Chief Uzael. Well, let me first say this. Thank you for the invite. Thank you for allowing me to come here and speak these words. And I thank you in a very genuine sense because um, I don't really get to come out too often. And most times when people get to hear me, it's through Facebook or YouTube, on other platforms, and you continually open up the platform to me, and I'm very, very thankful for that because everyone knows that when you fill yourself with the Word of God, you have a very, very deep desire to release it. So people who are constantly reading and studying are people who, if they're genuine enough, are people who love and desire to share, and I definitely enjoy sharing in the Word. As far as coming back once or twice a month or more than that, that's totally up to you. You know, I give you great respect in private, as you already know. And an opportunity like this, I take great honor in publicly giving you that same respect to let people know that we're taught to do what the Creator says, but we do have people that we respect and we value that we look at as being higher than us. And just so the family knows, that's the brother right here, Chief Uzael. That's a big brother to me. So you just let me know when. I'm on your time. You let me know if you would like me to come once or twice a month. It's totally up to you, Chief. You give me the word, and I'm on it. Thank you very much again.
Told out my brother, and can you just briefly tell the people now? Last month I went out with brother with Chief Avdiel to the Metropolitan Museum of Natural no Metropolitan Museum of Art, and he gave a tour on Egyptian civilization, which was excellent. I know that some of you might have seen the clips of some of the explanations that he gave, where he was reading the Medunetta or the hieroglyphs, as many of us know it. And he also gave a demonstration of all the things that were going on in Egypt, the symbols, the symbolism, what certain things meant, um, how we got there, the Asiatics got there, and how the children of Israel got there, which was very enlightening. And I'll say this to I had never been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and that's the thing. Like when you live in a city like New York City, tourists actually enjoy things better than the actual people who reside in the city. I had never been to that museum. I never been to the Statue of Liberty. Never been to a lot of landmarks. But that day when I went there with my brother, we spent about 3 hours there, and he was explaining certain things. You felt a sense of enrichment when you went into the museum and you began to see certain things. And when you go into a room with artifacts that Egyptians have left behind, depicting themselves, and you see everyone in the artifacts is black or brown, then it makes you really appreciate that um, the children of Israel who were mistaken as Egyptians were also brown, as my brother Chief Avdiel so clearly explained in the video that was put up. So he's having a second tour, the Origins of Civilization tour, part 2. Would you like to explain that a little and let everybody know the date, um, and let them know when they could join you or how they could get in contact with you about that? Because I think it's also very important.
Thank you very much. So, the Origins of Civilization Tour Part 2 is taking place Sunday, September 23rd, from 1 p.m. to about 4 p.m. I originally wanted it from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., but just so the family knows, that evening brings in Sukkot, and there is nothing that I am ever going to do that's going to trump the word of God. Is going to trump the call of God. So I actually cut off the Torah earlier so as to give people enough time to get home and get in. I even went so far as to check online, because now we have the technology to find out that the sun doesn't go down that day until 7:26 p.m. So I'm ending the Torah at 4 p.m. To give people more than enough time to make it back home before 7:26 p.m. when the sun goes down here at that time, at least here in New York City. Again, it's Sunday, September 23rd at the Metropolitan Museum. And this time, the theme that I'm visiting is our existence in West Africa, pre-colonial America, pre-slavery, pre-Columbus. I'm touching on the transatlantic slave trade routes. We will actually go into various parts of the museum that shows you things like the point of no return, which was that castle in, I believe it's Ghana, that shows you that very last point in West Africa that we reached before we made our final voyage to the Americas. This is very, very important because the topic of whether or not indigenous black people here in America um, were here before we came here, and whether or not we came in the numbers that we believe to have come from West Africa. I think it's very important to include this topic in the part two of my lecture at the museum or my tour, because right now in the conscious community, one of the hottest topics is whether or not we came here by slave ships or a great majority of us were already here. Those of us who follow Torah know and understand very, very clearly that we certainly came here by way of ship. What many of us may not know is that there were actually some of us already here. And just so you know, some of that is spoken on in the Apocrypha, in the Apocryphal writings. So I will be going into that history there, as well as touching on the routes of this transatlantic slave trade, as well as opening up Deuteronomy 28 and showing you how the slave trade routes themselves agree with what is taking place in Deuteronomy 28 verses 15 through 68. Very, very powerful lecture. If you're in New York City or the tri-state area, you don't want to miss it. Once again, we're going to try to film, but just so you know, not all of the film makes it online because the museum gives us a hard time with filming, as Chief Uzael could tell you. They don't want you to take a 3-second video footage. And as far as picture taking, you can't even take a picture with a flash. If you come in there and you hold a camera and you look like you're filming, they damn near ready to ask you to leave. So that's the reason why we put up little snippets and little clips, not because we think we're so cool that we can get it all out in 3 minutes, but because the museum limits us. So if you can make it, it'll be more important for you to come and make it. If not, for those who live way outside of New York City, we're going to try our best to capture those very, very powerful moments on film where we can capture it. But just keep in mind, the museum is going to be on us so that we don't have that kind of footage. And it's not really wickedness on behalf of the museum. Just so you know, this takes place in every museum throughout the world. If I'm showing you freely everything in the museum, why would you come out to see it? So part of the reason why the museum does not allow for filming is because in today's technology, in today's world, I can literally live stream from the museum and it's like you've been there yourself. And unless you're really geeky and nerdy, you would care less about actually going there because you already saw it. So they limit your ability to accurately depict what's in there because they want people to come out and pay money. So I like to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I don't like to try to paint a narrative that is not true. So I don't want people walking away saying that the museum is wicked and that's what these Caucasians do. When the simple fact and the simple truth is, if you taking footage, why the hell would you come out? So that's the common sense within that. And the other thing that I'm touching on is Hannibal. Many of you have probably heard of the name of Hannibal of Carthage, one of the world's greatest military generals in world history. His strategies are taught in many of the military colleges throughout America, but in particular, West Point was one of the greatest military academies here in America, here in the country. And in West Point, they have a whole curriculum on the guerrilla warfare tactics employed by Hannibal, which were later employed by Judah Maccabee. Hannibal precedes Judah Maccabee by almost 150 years, and many of his tactics Judah Maccabee employs. And one thing many of us may not know about Hannibal of Carthage is that the people of Carthage, which is basically the people of Libya, North Africa, that was a vassal state. The people of Carthage originally come from Phoenicia, and they were dispossessed by the northern tribes of Israel. And as they were dispossessed, they were actually exiled into Africa, where they founded the land of Carthage, or Tunis, which is in North Africa. But they tell you in their oral traditions and in their written records, which we have, that they come from Phoenicia. So guess what that means? The famous Hannibal of Carthage, the African military general that defeated the early Greeks and the early Romans and crossed the Alps with elephants, something that even today is virtually impossible. The language he communicated in with his soldiers was Hebrew, because the Phoenicians spoke Hebrew. That's very, very important. But more important than that is that in the Second Punic War, and the term Punic comes from the Greek way of saying Phoenicia. The Greek way to say Phoenicia is Punica. Hence, when we refer to the wars of Hannibal, they're known as the Punic Wars, because that's the Greek abbreviation of Punica, which is how they say Phoenicia, letting you know that Hannibal is from the land of Israel. He was a Canaanite, and Canaanites spoke Hebrew. But more importantly, in the Second Punic War, and I don't want to give away too much because I do want people to come into the museum, but I'll give you some of it. In the Second Punic War, Rome reached a standstill and said, what do we have to give you? And one of his requirements was that he wanted some of Lebanon, northern Israel, because he said that that's my territory. And Rome fired back and said, no, because we have on record that when you came up against, when you left Lebanon to go into northern Africa, you left with people from the tribe of Dan and Naphtali and Asher. So that means that we have people from the tribe of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali involved in the Punic Wars fought against Rome. This is deep, people. This means this is part of Israelite history. So I'm bringing all that out on that day. And if you're in the tri-state area, or if you can make it, you ain't going to want to miss it. Hallelujah. Thank you, Chief.
Hallelujah. So all the information will be given. I'm going to try my best to try to run the commercials after Shabbat on the D.C.B channel for people to be abreast of everything, the meeting spots, the fee, all the things that you need in order to make it there. So once again, thank you everyone for tuning in with us tonight. Really appreciate y'all. The peak count was 96 people for Shabbat night talk, which is up there, and I'm sure that a lot of it was because our brother was on. So thank you to Most High God once again for this night. And I didn't fall asleep. Y'all thought I was gonna fall asleep, but I did. And I'm thankful to the Creator for my brother Chief Avdiel, and may everyone have a blessed night's sleep. And I'll see you in the AM, 11 a.m. on the D.C.B channel, as we will continue with our Shabbat morning teachings, which we will have a very special guest joining us tomorrow, Chief Prince Hezekiah from the congregation out in Queens, New York, and also our brother Mikael will be doing Prince Mikael will be doing the Maftia's portion. So looking forward to seeing those brothers and sisters tomorrow that will come and join us and worship with us. And may the Most High God bless each and every one of you tonight. Shalom, shalom, and everyone have a blessed night's sleep. Hallelujah.